Hi, and welcome to my presentation on AI in the classroom, how teachers can evaluate tools and use AI to support learning. My name is Colin Meltzer. I've been in education for over 20 years. I taught math and science at the Carroll School, which is a school for children with language-based learning differences such as dyslexia. I've also served as an academic technology director, and I've also founded and led school makerspace programs. I am now the founder of Check-In AI, which is a formative assessment platform that uses AI to have conversational-based formative assessments. And I will talk more about that platform later in the presentation. But first, I want to start by talking about the question I hear all the time about AI and education. I hear it from people. I also see it on social media. And that question is AI good for education or is AI bad for education? I believe this is the wrong question. It's way too simplistic. And honestly, there's much more nuance in this question. And the question really should become this. How can we use AI in education for good? We're educators, we're teachers, we're administrators. We need to have a say on how AI is used in education. And for teachers and students, this fundamental question breaks down into two sub-questions, and that is, what can you use AI for? What should you use AI for? And students are asking this question every single day, and so are teachers. But honestly, for schools and teachers, it becomes more what AI tools are good, what AI tools are bad. And that's what I'm going to focus on in the first part of this presentation. How can we identify AI tools that are beneficial, and how can we identify tools that are not beneficial? Now, this is not a new problem in education, right? Whenever a new technology comes into the classroom, there's controversy. Whether it's grammar check, spell check, social media, Wikipedia, Google search, or even the calculator. In 1986, the calculator was very controversial. However, today, not so much. Calculator is a commonly accepted tool in schools. Why? Because we figured out the how. We didn't just throw it into schools and say, use it however you want. We used it for specific purposes. And we established policies around calculator use, guidelines that both teachers and students understand and accept, and even classroom norms of when to use it and how to use it. Now, I want to be really clear, because I think often, especially on social media, you see people say, look, the people who just want to ban and block AI, they're just like these people who wanted to ban calculators. And I want to be clear. I think calculators does not equal AI. These are different tools. We can learn from how we implemented calculators and other tools like them, like spelling grammar check, in the classroom. But AI is a different beast. It's a different level of power than the calculator, where the calculator really took over some of the more algorithmic tasks in math and allowed students to do more problem solving and thinking. AI can do that, but it can also take over some of the thinking, which is what we don't want. So we need to discuss that in more detail. And I don't want to oversimplify it saying, oh, see, like, get over yourself. AI is going to be great, just like the calculator. Okay? Not that simple. So how do we evaluate AI tools? Well, this is not new. When I was the director of academic technology, we had a process for evaluating any new technology that came into the classroom. And it focused on three main questions. What technology would we allow in? When would we allow it in? And how would we support it and structure it when we allowed it in? The what, the when, and the how. And I've taken a process that we developed and used for educational technology and adapted it into a framework or AI tools. So we're going to take what we've learned over the years, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but adjust it and adapt it to AI tools. And that's the framework I've created. So I want to be clear, this framework is for evaluating AI tools for students and not AI tools targeted at the teachers. Tools such as helping teachers write student reports, IEPs, lesson plans, or create worksheets. This framework is for AI tools that students will directly interact with. Now, with every educational technology, it's really important that learning goals come first, technology second. I have seen way too many times in schools that technology takes precedence to the learning goals. In other words, the technology's requirements dictate how the learning happens versus the learning goals should dictate what technology you use. Now, this framework has 3 tiers. Tier 1 has a bunch of questions, and those questions were adapted from what I used in my process for general ed tech. If a tool passes Tier 1, you bring it on to Tier 2, which is AI-specific questions. If it passes Tier 2, you go to Tier 3, which are school-specific questions, such as budget and technology infrastructure. I'm going to focus on Tier 1 and Tier 2 because Tier 3 is school-specific, and that will be up to you and your school. So each tier has 3 questions to pass. I try to simplify it and condense it to 3 questions. And these 3 questions, while on the surface seem simple, are actually not that simple. So let's go through them one by one. First, does the AI tool improve student learning? Now, this seems like a simple yes or no question on the surface. However, there's short-term and long-term. You could say, short-term, yeah, it's improving student learning. But does it improve student learning over the long term? How are you going to measure that? Okay? Sometimes it's obvious a tool doesn't improve student learning, and you can say no right off the bat. But it's important to think about and say, what student learning is this improving, and how is it doing it? Second is, does the AI tool fit the learning objective? And this is similar to student learning, but this is more specific. This is, when do you use the AI tool? And where should we integrate it into the curriculum? And when should we integrate it into our lesson planning? So there are many great AI tools out there, but they shouldn't be used all the time. Just like the calculator, right? We don't use the calculator for every single problem in math, especially in the lower grades. We use it when we're working on problem solving or more complicated math, where the focus is on the more complicated math and not the basic calculations. And this third one was a really important one. I used to ask all the time with educational technology that was not using AI. And that is, does the AI tool provide something meaningful better than non-AI alternatives? And especially in today's day and age, where I feel like AI is thrown into every single tool now just because it's the hot thing and people say, look, we use AI, right? It's important to think, is this offering a benefit that I could do without AI? Just like with other educational tech tools, we would say, is this technology offering a benefit that over paper and pencil? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You could do the same thing with paper and pencil, and the technology didn't really offer that much greater of a benefit and had some drawbacks. Now, with all 3 of these questions that I'm focused on student learning, learning objectives, and providing something meaningful better, there are a couple warning signs that you might be saying yes when you shouldn't be. And those warning signs, it's cool and the kids think it's fun. Now, I know student engagement is an important goal and really important for learning to happen. However, if it's cool and fun and the students are engaged is the only reason you're using a tool, that's great for the short term, but over the long term, kids become bored of that tool, right? And I think smartboards, if you remember those from back in the day, were a perfect example of this. When used incorrectly, they offered flair, and students loved coming up to draw on them because they had this flair, they were exciting, but that wore off over time. When used well, to sort of illustrate different learning concepts, I thought they were a great tool. So if you're saying when answering a lot of these questions, does it improve student learning? Yeah, it really engages students and they think it's cool and fun, and that's the main reason. That's a warning sign that maybe it shouldn't pass Tier 1. However, if it does pass Tier 1, we move on to Tier 2. And these are more AI-specific questions that are developed specifically for AI tools. And the first one is, who's doing the cognitive heavy lifting, the student or the AI? And this is really important, right? I mean, one of the greatest fears in education now is a student types into ChatGPT, write an essay on Huckleberry Finn for me, and an essay pops out. Is the student doing some cognitive work? Sure, they're creating the prompt. But the cognitive heavy lifting is done by the AI. Not a useful way to use that tool. The second question, I think, comes down to the fundamental nature of teaching. Teaching is a human endeavor. There's a human element. All right? The most important factor in a student's success is the teacher. That's why asking the question, does the AI tool take over the teaching or supplement it, is really important. If it completely takes over the teaching and the teacher has no role, that would be a warning sign to me. However, if it supplements and improves the teacher's ability to teach, that could be a great tool. And third, does the AI tool act in a pedagogically sound way? Remember, pedagogy is important, that theory of learning. If the AI tool doesn't act in a pedagogically sound way, we shouldn't be using it. I would also argue with question 1, the cognitive heavy lifting, there were some non-AI tools that did the cognitive heavy lifting for students because they structured it so much. Also with the pedagogically sound way, there were many non-AI based tools that were not necessarily pedagogically sound. So while this is AI specific, it does play a role with non-AI tech tools as well. So if it passes Tier 1, Tier 2, great. We have focused on the what and the when for the tool. Now it's time to focus on the how. Okay? The how is really important as well, right? So when you're introducing a new AI tool to students, how do you do it? First, you got to be transparent with students, okay? You got to tell them it's AI. Especially when AI was new, there were students who would freak out when this thing sounded like a human. But once you're transparent that it's AI, you have to preview what AI is and is not with students. So AI is not a human. There's not a human on the other side. It's a probabilistic model. The way large language models work is they're predicting the next best word to come in a sentence based on all the data they've been fed. So they're only as good as the data they've been fed. Third, you need to demo the AI tool, role-playing a student. In other words, if there's a new AI tool that students are going to interact with, get on the projector and show them how to use it as if you were a student. And fourth, have a scenario-based ethics discussions. This could be a presentation by itself, right? And there's lots of great tools out there that people are developing in curriculum to have ethics discussions around AI. However, you should work this somewhere into the curriculum. It's a longer lesson than just introducing a new AI tool, but if you're introducing a new AI tool that could have some ethical issues, put a scenario out there. Do you think this is when you should use it or when you shouldn't? Just like we did with calculators, where we said, should you use a calculator here or should you not? And you put in different scenarios. All right, we've done the what, the when, and the how. Now I want to give you an example of an AI tool I've developed and see how it fits into this framework. Because this framework can also be really useful for people developing new AI tools. This tool is called Check-in-AI. What it is, it's a formative assessment platform, and we're going to put this tool through the framework. However, before we do, I need to give you a little bit of background on it and show you what it is. So here's the background of it and how I came up with the idea behind Check-in-AI. One of my biggest frustrations in the classroom was formative assessment. This is because so often I felt like I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of student learning. And that's what students saw too. The tip of the iceberg and the grades. And I knew I wanted more. I wanted to see the entire iceberg of learning. I wanted to support their depth and growth in the entire learning process. However, this was a challenge, right? How do you support, document, and even maybe measure depth and growth of learning? Well, after many conversations, it hit me. Individualized conversations. Whenever I had an individualized conversation with students, that's when I learned the most about their understanding. And that's where they learned the most too. After these conversations where I could really feel I could help students. So if individualized conversations were so great, why didn't I do them more? And what made them great? What made them great? Well, the magic of individualized conversations are the probing follow-up questions. A really good teacher can ask really good probing follow-up questions. That's the magic. But, all right, I was pretty good at asking probing follow-up questions. That was one of my strengths as a teacher. Why didn't I do them all the time? Well, it's just realities and logistics of teaching. It's simple math. Let's say each conversation takes 3 to 4 minutes. That includes transition time, right? And you have 20 to 30 kids in the class. That's 1 to 2.5 hours of time. You can't do that on a daily basis, never mind a weekly basis. Even monthly, that's a challenge to get to every kid. So you prioritize and do it with particular kids. And even if you could hire 20 to 30 teachers so every kid could have an individualized conversation every day, it's all still in my brain. It was not documented and not easy to act on because it wasn't documented. I couldn't see that progress over time. I couldn't sort of quickly have a conversation with everyone in the class and say, hey, I need to work with this student first. And this was the time when generative AI was just coming into the picture. And I thought to myself, hey, AI could potentially be a good fit for this problem. This could be a good use of AI in education and fit the framework. And that's the story behind Check-in-AI and why I created Check-in-AI. It's a formative assessment tool that has individualized conversations with each student in your class all at once within 5 to 10 minutes with probing follow-up questions. And it documents it and measures it at the same time. So that sounds nice in theory, but I want to give you some example use cases and demo it for you. And as I go through these demos, I want you to think back to these tiers, and tier 1 and tier 2 and the questions around them. And is Check-in-AI an example of a good tool that can be used in schools effectively? And should we let it in? And when should we let it in? So you may say, yeah, sounds like a great tool, let's let it in. When should we let it in is the next question, and what are the norms around it? I'm now in the Check-in-AI platform, and in order to do a check-in with students, you have to first create it. And there's different types here, okay? There's check-ins, exit ticket, pre-assessments. I'm not going to go into all the details of the difference of each one. but they're designed for specific purposes and specific use cases. The first use case I'm going to talk about is a general check-in example. And this is when so often, I found this in the classroom, you'd introduce a topic. You thought you did an amazing lesson. But it takes you 2 weeks to realize that a student really just memorized the content and didn't understand it at a deep level. So wouldn't it be great if you could figure out if they could apply a concept such as the conservation of matter, which is a topic in chemistry, to a new situation you hadn't talked about. So the way you set up a check-in is you choose a topic, in this case a conservation of matter. That's the topic the check-in will focus on. And then you choose a grade level that tells the check-in the reading level you want it to be and the understanding level. And then the real power of these check-ins is you can add guiding questions. You have to have at least one. And these guiding questions guide the conversation. In fact, the AI will always ask the first guiding question as the first question to start off the conversation. So in this case, I put an example. Now I'm going to show you this in action. So now we're in the student view. You'll notice the first thing it asks is that first guiding question. A student mixes vinegar and baking soda in a sealed plastic bag. The bag inflates as a gas forms, but the total mass of the bag is the same before and after the reaction. Why does the total mass stay the same even though a gas is produced? So, probably a lot of you are not chemistry teachers or understand conservation of mass or remember it from your middle or high school days. However, just like students, you're pretty smart. You know what topic we're studying, conservation of mass. So that's what a student would answer. Doesn't show understanding of this application, but they might answer it. And under a normal worksheet, that's where it would end. They'd move on to the next question, and that would be it. And you'd see this, if you're lucky, the same day if you're walking around. More likely, a day, 2 later. However, with Check-in AI, you get the probing follow-up questions. It says, you're connecting it to the right idea. What does the conservation of mass mean in your own words in this situation with the sealed bag and the gas? So it brings them back to that guiding question. Also, it provides feedback if you want. As a teacher, you can turn on and off how much feedback a student is given, but I have it turned on for this example. So it gives a rating, and if a student clicks on the rating, it gives them the scale, and if they expand here, it actually explains why it gave them that rating. If you click on this eye, it will give an example of a good answer. Now, as the teacher, you can show that to the students or hide it from the students. Now, I'm going to end the conversation here for now to show you what happens when the conversation ends. Once the conversation ends, either they've answered fully or they've hit the maximum number of questions, the AI goes and gives an overall rating as well as a list of strengths, weaknesses, and topics to review. The idea behind this is to empower the students. And I have seen teachers using this with students who love it as a review before tests, so they know what they understand and what they don't. And this overall rating is not an average of the individual ratings. It is the AI looking at the entire conversation and seeing, do they understand the topic or not? It also provides an explanation, like before. So that's the student side. How is this helpful to the teacher? Well, if you go to the report, here the teacher can see the entire class. And here's a quick overview that's in beta to show what percentage of your students need support, what's developing, and how many are on track. This is a made-up class, but this can be useful if this is a real class because you could go down here and see exactly which students need support and which are okay. So you could know which students you need to go out as the teacher and support and help first. Also, it's a complete documentation. So if I click on this, it has the feedback and the entire conversation and ratings there. As the teacher, it's really important as we said, that the AI tool supports the teacher and not take over, so you can override any AI rating as the teacher. So that's one example use case of checking AI. I want to give another one. The next example use case I want to talk about is related to executive function and executive function strategies. I am a big fan of project-based learning. I used it a ton in the classroom. And one of the biggest challenges was helping students break a larger project down into smaller parts. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of classrooms, this work is done for the students. The teacher does all that planning for them. They say, do this part first, then this part, then this part, then this part. And I understand why. It's easier. Everyone's on the same page. And it'll result in a successful project. But we're missing a real opportunity. The chance for students to work on these executive function strategies. So here's an example where I created a daily project planning check-in. Because it's really hard to figure out which students need help and which don't right at the beginning of class. So this was designed to give everyone in the class, the beginning class, complete within 5 minutes hopefully, and 4 questions. What project are you working on? What part of your project are you going to work on today and why? What information or materials do you need to complete this part of your project? And also that time estimation skill. How long do you think it will take to complete this part of the project? So here's the student side, and it starts with that first guiding question. What project are you working on? The science project, of course. Now, that's nice. Everyone can say this science project, and I can't tell you how many times if I gave students a worksheet or even tied them directly and said, what are you working on? They'd say, the project, the science project, right? This has a follow-up question and says, what is your science project about specifically? How light impacts plant growth. It's a very classic science experiment. And then it goes on to the next guiding question. What part of the project are you going to work on today and why? So there's 2 parts here. What are you going to work on and why is that important? 2 important skills. And often, especially students who struggle with the executive function in the beginning, they say, my project. And if this was a regular worksheet, that's where it would end. However, this asks the follow-up questions. To plan better, can you say which part of your project you'll work on today? Like research, setting up the experiment, collecting data, or working on the presentation? It even gives some examples, some hints, some guidance. I'm going to end that there. And I'm going to jump to the teacher report. So again, this is a fake class. But if you go to the teacher report, what's great about this from the teacher perspective is this overall rating gives you a quick example of which students you might need to actually go and have a human conversation with. It's sort of a triage tool. You have 20 kids in a class, they fill out, so you can see, all right, these 3 I need to touch base with first, while the others are good to go and start working on their project. The next use case I want to talk about is reading comprehension. We've all seen the reading comprehension multiple choice questions that drive us nuts as teachers. Ones that are pure regurgitation. And while regurgitation is important, what's more important is people to be able to actually have a deep understanding of a text or what they're reading. So this is a special check-in type and check-in AI called reading comprehension. And in here, you can put the name of a book or a play, or you can copy and paste actual text. And that's what the entire conversation will focus on. And again, you put in reading comprehension questions. So in this case, we have Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, and what is the main reason for Romeo's sadness in first act in the play? So I'm going to be honest with you, I don't remember Romeo and Juliet very well, so I had to look up these answers myself. So I'm going to show you a conversation I did, and this is the teacher view of it for documentation. So the first question was, what is the main reason for Romeo's sadness in Act 1 of the play, Romeo and Juliet? And I looked up the answer, and it was the character Rosalind. Now, if this was a normal worksheet, that's where it would stop. You'd either get it right or wrong, or it asks the same question. And it says, you're right that Rosalind is connected to his sadness, but what exactly about Rosalind is making Romeo so upset in Act 1? So it's asking that follow-up question. Dig deeper into reading comprehension and not just regurgitation of facts. Here's another example. So let's say they say, what is the main reason for Romeo's sadness in Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet? Well, I don't remember Act 1. I didn't do my reading. And I know the story of Romeo and Juliet, so obviously it's Juliet. Well, because we said Act 1, the conversation is only going to focus on Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet. And it says, think back to the beginning of Act 1, before Romeo even meets Juliet at the party. Who is he upset about then, and what is he sad about in that situation? So here's another example where you can have these deep, probing follow-up questions to reading comprehension questions with immediate feedback, so it doesn't limit you to one-word answers or multiple choice. So now that I've given you the background of how Check-In AI is created and some demos and use cases, let's review it in terms of the framework. Is it a good fit? So let's start with Tier 1. The first question is, does the AI tool improve student learning? Well, it's set up to ask probing follow-up questions, which is improving student learning. 2, does the AI tool fit the learning objective? As long as you set the check-in up right with the right topic and guiding questions, it sure can. And 3, does the AI tool provide something meaningfully better than non-AI alternatives? Yes, as we went through, you can't have an individualized conversation like this with every student in your class within 5 to 10 minutes. It's not practically possible. Now, what's important is all these yeses are dependent on how you set up the tool. So as I demoed in the check-in, I was very deliberate about the topic I choose and the guiding questions or reading comprehension questions I added. Because with any powerful AI tool, it can definitely fit the learning objective and improve student learning, but also if used incorrectly, it cannot. And that's important to remember as we go through these tiers. Now let's go to Tier 2. All right, we're now on Tier 2, which is more AI-specific questions. Who is doing the cognitive heavy lifting, the student or the AI? In the case of Check-In AI, it's definitely the student, because the AI is just asking questions and the student has to answer them. Now, as you notice, it can provide feedback and example answers. You can turn those off depending on your goal. Example answers can help students actually do the cognitive heavy lifting if they use them correctly. That's why it's important to demo how to use that feedback to students when introducing a tool like Check-In AI. 2, does the AI tool take over the teaching or supplement it? This is a really good question because in this case, you could have a really good individual conversation with a student, just like Check-In AI. However, you can't do it at scale. And what a lot of teachers have actually told me is they give Check-In AI first to identify the student's strengths, weaknesses, and topics to review. And then they meet with the student face to face and say, how are you going to improve your understanding of those topics you didn't understand? So yes, it supplements it. It's designed to supplement it. Unlike an AI tutor, the questions are designed specifically not to give the answers away. And 3, does the AI tool act in a pedagogically sound way? Answer, yes. That's what it's designed to do. Ask probing follow-up questions, which is pedagogically sound way of teaching that teachers use every single day in the classroom. So great, Check-in AI passes Tier 1, Tier 2, let's throw it into the classroom. Not so fast. We've talked about the what, right? That's Check-in AI. You still have to decide, when are you going to use it? What classes are you going to use it in? What part of the curriculum are you going to use it? Are you going to use it in class, as homework, exit tickets? And this takes practice and some experimentation. And also, as I said before, that how you introduce a Check-in AI is really important in modeling it for students. Specifically, modeling how you should use that feedback and how that can help them learn. So I want to wrap up with those two questions I talked about earlier. What can you use AI for? What should you use AI for? I hope this presentation and this framework gives you some guidance in answering those two questions. However, I know we're still at the beginning of this AI journey, and things are complicated and tools keep on changing. When used appropriately and effectively, AI can have a good impact on learning in schools. Well, thank you for coming to my presentation. Please reach out to me with any questions or comments at cmeltzer@checkinai.com. You can check out Check-in AI at the website listed here below. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.